So Uganda is our country that we're presenting on. It is a country in East Central Africa. It has around 93,000 square miles, about the size of Oregon, and has a population of 31 million, so about the population of Canada. GDP of nearly $11 billion. The dominant religion of the country is Christianity, with 85% of the country being active followers. So this is part of Africa, so there isn't any written down of history for the first around majority of human civilization. Around 2,000 years ago, we started to get a bit of oral history, oral traditions from the kingdoms that were there, specifically the Empire of Kitara and the kingdoms of Burgunda, Toro, Ankala, and Ugosa. Um, when Arab traders moved inland around the early 1800s is when the first written history started getting recorded down, and this is when Islam was introduced into the area, and the majority of the population there are converted to Islam. In around the 1860s, British explorers were searching for the source of the Nile River, and they found this place, the Kingdom of Burgundia, um, and it was followed quickly in 1877 by Anglican missionaries, British missionaries, which converted a large amount of the population to Anglican. There were a lot of conflicts in the early days between the Islamic missionaries and priests that were already there and the newly coming in British Anglican missionaries. And then the Catholic Church followed suit, and in 1879, Catholic missionaries came in. Religious debates quickly started heating up, and partially thanks to the instability in the area, Britain took direct control over this as part of imperialism and placed it on the Imperial British East African Company. So this gave Britain's missionaries, the Anglican missionaries, a pretty big head start. And together with the Catholic ones, they ended up converting the majority of the country over to Christianity. Um, in 1894, they annexed all of Burgundia and all the adjoining territories and made them into the Protectorate of Uganda. Fast forward around 70 years or so, and in 1961, Britain then granted internal self-governance to this newly formed territory of Uganda, where they could elect their own leaders and make their own decisions. And then around 1 year later, they elected to leave Britain entirely, and was formally independent. Around 10 years after independence, there was a coup. The elected leader was ousted by a dictator who then committed a bunch of atrocities, who was then, after a bunch of failed military campaigns, completely ousted by another coup by the former prime minister, who then turned himself into another dictator, who then destroyed the economy of the country and committed a bunch of genocides. So for the next from around 1971 to around 2000, it was a pretty big mess, and there was tons of human rights violations all over the place. In 2006, the country held its first presidential elections, however, so it did transition back to democracy, and now it's back to stability. Its economy still suffered, but it's improving greatly. In Uganda, currently religious freedom is given to all. However, all religions must be registered with the government, and as such, the government will basically audit the religion to make sure it isn't a cult. Currently, thanks to or not really thanks, but because of the early Catholic and Protestant missionaries, around around 75% to 80% of the country is Christian, with around 40% being Roman Catholic and another 30% being Anglican. Around 13 or 14% of the country is Islamic as a holdover from the original Islamic missionaries, and the rest of it is basically unaffiliated with religion or um, other small branches of Protestantism.
Okay, so for some of the current issues, there is actually a social media subject social media tax of 5 cents per day, and while that might not seem like a lot, most of the country lives in poverty, and the taxes imposed to get people off the internet to basically to get them to not say anything that the government doesn't want them to say. So there are some important prominent religious figures in Uganda, and that is the Ugandan martyrs. Um, so as you know, Uganda is a country that has roughly 85% of all its people being at least one denomination of being a part of one denomination of Christianity, with nearly 40% of the population being Roman Catholics. Um, there are a few prominent figures, and these are the martyrs. So basically, they were executed between January 31st, 1885, and January 27th, 1887. The martyrs are what sparked the spread of Christianity in Africa. One prominent figure, Joseph Mukasa, led the growth of the Christian faith. However, the king at that time, Mwanga, was deceived and believed that Mukasa was loyal to the god of Christians as opposed to him, the king. So he ordered the execution of Mukasa and all his followers unless they renounced their faith. They chose to keep their faith, and they were all burned alive, but they all didn't suffer like people burning should. So that is the Ugandan martyrs.
All right. So, in terms of important sites and pilgrimages, we've got two cathedrals. One as the seat of the Roman Catholic Church in Uganda, which is St. Mary's Cathedral, and we have St. Paul's Cathedral in Namirembe, which is the provincial seat of the Anglican Church of Uganda today. But probably the most important site in Uganda is the Namugongo Martyrs Shrine, and it's dedicated to those who died spreading the Catholic and Protestant faiths in Uganda and then perished to violence. So the main pilgrimage in Africa as a whole is on June 3rd. Over 1 million pilgrims descend upon this very shrine, and people all across Africa fly in to honor those missionaries who were killed in the violent spreading of Catholicism in the late 1800s.
Okay, so to add on to what we said earlier about June 3rd being a very important day, June 3rd is actually Uganda's martyr feast, which means that there's a lot of Ugandan natives and a lot of people that live in the area kind of celebrate the fallen ones who have perished for their faith. I think said prior there was 23 Anglican and 22 Catholic converts to Christianity that were executed between 2 years, 1885 and 1887 by Mwanga II. So he was the king of that area at that time, and he forcibly killed all of them. And because they were martyrs, they're like kind of celebrated years throughout. So both of them served as models for how to stay strong for their beliefs and often taught in schools as part of their history and culture. Another important festival is the Festival of the Nile. So every start of August in the Jinja, the Nile River is celebrated because how integrated it is in terms of history, geography, and culture for Uganda. From being a forefront to resources for development to housing celestial bodies, it was in terms of, if you look past in different literature, especially in Ugandan literature, you'll see how the Nile River is sort of celebrated as a vessel for celestial bodies to sort of reside in and to like provide food, but also like to keep safe housing too. So the Nile River is praised for music, dance, theater, and folklore and storytelling. And as the Nile River is so important in everything, it's reminiscent of native cultures. That's why you see a lot of native wear, native like sort of tradition that follow through with this. Another festival that's also important in terms of the 15% of Islam population in Uganda is Eid al-Adha, which is celebrated on July 30th to 31st. It's supposed to be the festival of sacrifice to honor the willingness of Abraham or Abraham in Catholicism to sacrifice his son to God as an act of immense obedience. Here in Uganda, Eid marks the end of Ramadan, and with a large Islam population of, let's say, like 15 to 18%, this festival is marked with the sacrifice of animals and Eid prayers. So, this is an entire presentation. Here's our sources, too. All relatively citable sources. Thank you. This is our presentation in Uganda.